All right, so it is now 6:30. I think we can consider
recording in progress.
So the recording button just got pushed, and so we can officially open the Norton Conservation Commission meeting for Monday, November 22nd, 2021. It is now 6:30, and as has been required for these remote meetings, we will begin by reading the required preamble requiring remote meetings. So Dan Pearson, if you could go ahead and get started with that.
Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GL Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Norton Conservation Commission will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found at the end of the agenda. Members of the public attending public hearing / meeting virtually will be allowed to make comments if they wish to do so during the portion of the hearing designated for public comment by raising their hand virtually or pressing *9 if participating by phone. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Norton Cable website, www.nortonmediacenter.org, an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting.
All right, thank you, Dan. And so the members of the commission and staff are John Thomas, our director. Megan is our administrative assistant. She's also participating in the meeting. Commission members are myself, Julian Kadish, chair. Our vice chair is not able to attend this meeting tonight, but we also have Ron O'Reilly, Dan Pearson, Jean Blood, Carrie Schneider, and Dan Doyle participating as commission members. And we will open our agenda with new public hearings, but this week, which is unusual, we do not have any new hearings scheduled. So we will be going to hearings that were previously opened and discussed. Hearing A is DEP file number 250-1070, notice of, it's a notice of intent on 0 Rear Eddy Street for White Oak Share Corporation. And I assume we have, this has been opened previously in January and has had multiple continuations. And I assume there is a representative of the applicant.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Tim McGuire, wetland scientist from Goddard Consulting. I'm here on behalf of ShareCorp. Sam Wydak, the owner and applicant, is present, as well as our team's engineer, Craig Siganowski. Now, since our last hearing, during our last hearing, we submitted some supplemental information in regard to the status of the pond and the status of the floodplain, which has no base flood elevation. Therefore, it's our responsibility as the applicant to demonstrate. Both of these items are essentially our goal in coming back before you tonight to further discuss, as the applicant felt that the supplemental information that was provided wasn't discussed in enough detail up to this point. So we're hoping to discuss those and put the stormwater issues aside for now, as those are still in progress and going to take more time to revise. We did submit a letter to the commission this morning in regards to the status of some of the comments from the stormwater, but the stormwater management will be heavily influenced by the status of the pond being classified as such or as a river, in addition to the floodplain. So for these reasons, it's our goal tonight to further discuss the pond and the floodplain. So we also submitted some supplemental information to the commission supporting the pond's status as a pond, including the DEP's list of integrated waters and the compilation of lakes, ponds, reservoirs, and impoundments in Massachusetts. And I'm happy to do a screen share if the host would allow. Thank you very much. So essentially, to start out with, just as a recap of what we had already submitted last week at our at the previous hearing, we went through documentation of the pond being classified as a pond by the town. Historically, there's a great deal of evidence in previous filings that the commission has treated it as such without including riverfront. And we don't feel that the commission had really discussed these in depth, and the applicant has asked us to sort of continue the discussion in that the commission has considered it that previously. And we've had sign-offs from Jennifer Carlino on inquiry forms, as such the previous conservation administrator. Previous determinations of applicability have been filed, all of which, these are just screenshots from that are included in the letter. We, as you may remember, we submitted the actual filings themselves. Then we went on to discuss the regulatory compliance insofar as ponds are defined as lacking primarily riverine characteristics, which mostly consists of unidirectional flow. We submitted videos demonstrating a lack of flow. There was discussion from the commission in regards to us utilizing a flow meter to do so. The applicant has asked us prior to going down that road to continue these discussions and with the evidence that we have. The Wetlands Protection Act also defines ponds as those bodies of water at least 10,000 square feet, labeled as such on the most recent USGS map, as this water body is, with Meadowbrook, the perennial stream portions, stopping west of the pond itself. Remember, our proposed work is over in this upland area just north of the pond. So we went along to articulate those examples, and we've provided some more information in regards to the pond being shown on the DEP list of integrated waters. It has its own PALIS number, which stands for Pond and Lake Identification System, which actually is this next document here. So Meadowbrook Pond actually, this is showing the Mendon one, but there is one in Norton. If you would allow me to I could do a Command F for it. I thought I'd click the Norton one. Here it is. So it does have its own identification, calling it out as such under DEP. And we submitted several other documentation from the town and from other sources indicating that it is a pond. So that's the discussion. We'd like to continue on that. In regards to the floodplain, I could give a quick overview. As previously, unless, I'm sorry, was someone trying to comment? I must have misheard. I'll continue the discussion. In regards to the floodplain, as you remember, there's no base flood elevation. So it's our responsibility as the applicant to provide information supporting that. This is from the Wetlands Protection Act, 310 CMR 10. It states that when there's no flood data available to determine the boundary of BLSF, bordering land subject to flooding, it shall be the maximum lateral extent of floodwater which has been observed or recorded. So we've submitted a letter to the commission signed from an abutter, Matthew Pickett, stating where he met our surveyors out in the field and helped us determine exactly where in his life, in the portion of his life that he's lived at this property, that the highest floodwater that he's seen. The surveyors shot that in to be elevation 61.7. So we're still doing a conservative estimate for floodplain, and we believe that we don't need calculations to demonstrate that, as we're showing the floodplain elevation to be above that. Remember, 61.7, where we're showing it at 62.5. And the average high water level of the pond is still below that, 61.9. So the 61.9 The average water level that the surveyors observed in the field is extremely close to what the abutter had visually indicated. And we believe that that's sufficient evidence from a credible source that we would use that to confirm the wetland line as such. And as a reminder, the closest, we're keeping all work outside of the 25-foot buffer zone, and there's no impacts to wetlands. We don't anticipate flooding issues in this case, and we'd like to ask that the commission would consider this estimation to be an appropriate floodplain line. And I believe that's all we have for new information at this time. I'm happy to open it up to the commission for discussion or any clarification on the new materials we've submitted. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments from either John, our director, or commission members?
Mr. Chairman, I still would like to see some more data about the flow and whether there's unidirectional flow. The common name of a water body isn't really dispositive of whether or not it's a pond or a river. So just because it's called Meadowbrook Pond doesn't mean that it is actually a pond. From the map, it does look like it's meandering and it's long. Sorry, and so I would personally like some more information about whether or not there are true riverine characteristics in there. And
for my own clarification, what would the applicant offer us with regard to that? Would you think flow meter data would help, or Tim, do you want to address that?
Well, the flow meter certainly would depict the calculations of flow. However, it's in my experience, it's been a bit of an unconventional ask. In other cases where we've demonstrated similar issues, we've essentially just used the orange peel test, which was demonstrated in the previous videos that I had submitted to the commission, where we left it there for a minute and there was no flow at all. We have observations from the abutter who's stated that it's just been a pond and there hasn't been flow. Insofar as the boards are not removed from the impoundment, which there's no intention to do so, there's no flow occurring there. And the regulations in regards to your comment on the naming of the pond as such on the USGS map, we're not just using that as an arbitrary label or clarification. The regulations define ponds as being those that are shown on the most recent USGS map. When that's not the case, when ponds are not labeled, they can be demonstrated with a lack of primarily riverine characteristics. So if we didn't have the label of the USGS on the pond and the flow test that we've had at this point, I would think that the flow meter would then be used in the instances that there is essentially a paucity of information in that regard. We feel that we've submitted a great deal at this point of information external of including a flow meter.
Right, but we're not bound by the USGS map under the regulations. In my experience, in my other experience, we have had water bodies called ponds, but they are in fact rivers, even though there is an impoundment behind a dam, and DEP has recognized that. So I still don't think that we have enough information to really determine that this is a pond, just given some of the conflicting information. We do have abutters that have said that it does have riverine characteristics, especially when the flow is low. So I think we do have differing information that has been submitted to us.
And just to carry
I'm sorry, if I might, just for a point of clarification, has there been what information from the abutters are you referencing? If so, I don't believe that's been forwarded to the applicant for our internal review.
Oh, I thought there was a letter from, I don't know if it was Winslow Farm or
it was
somebody else.
This was at the very, very beginning of the notice.
Back in the spring, right?
So we received that letter and we submitted a letter addressing all of his comments. He used the same exact regulatory compliance that we used. He cited the same things, and I can pull up the letter that I just had up again on the screen if you would like, but every single thing in that letter was addressed by our submittal. Here, let me, so for
I'm
example,
just curious why a flow meter, I mean, it would be supplemental. If the orange peel didn't float, then the flow meter shouldn't detect any flow as well. So why wouldn't it be just used as supplemental clarification?
it certainly could be. The applicant has expressed certain frustrations with the amount of effort that we're putting into making this determination when it has previously by the commission been considered a pond, and just expressed grievances that the other, I understand that you have to review what's before you today in the present, but he feels that he hasn't been getting the same treatment as other individuals in town who've had similar projects in the vicinity of the water body.
Tim, this is John Thomas. Can I just butt in here and say that as the applicant, you need to provide information, not just the application, but, for instance, if there was a historic line for this Meadow Brook, is that you need to take a look at the projects of concern and have them show that the work that was issued by the commission would potentially be within riverfront area. So you haven't done that yet. So I'm just trying to give you that kind of heads up.
All right, I have a question though, procedurally. If it's my understanding that if you define it as a pond, then projects adjacent the pond borders don't fall under the riverfront requirements. Is that correct? So why would this not be a problem with every impounded water body across the state? Because we have, from the Mills Act alone in 1837, we have a huge number of impoundments that were created across the state. And yet, and I'm, I happen to live adjacent to one, namely Norton Reservoir. And yet, as I understand it, even though my property is on the banks, the riverfront doesn't apply. So how do we distinguish between any impounded body potentially having an original path, as certainly the Norton Reservoir has paths where the various rivers and brooks enter into it. So for the purposes of the law having been drafted, where the exception of ponds, certainly Winnicott, which is I believe a leftover from a glacial depression, which is not an impoundment, although I think there is a structure there after the fact. So help me define of where we apply the rivers, the riverfront, and where we don't when you have an apparent impoundment. Can anybody help me with that?
So similar to Winnicott, I believe that Meadow Brook is the perennial stream that does flow into Winnicott by the north there on the other side of the chateau. But likewise to this water body, it's the same perennial stream flowing into that. And the Wetland Protection Act regulations define that as the terminus of the stream where it enters the pond. So I would think for the Winnicott example, at that point on the far side of the chateau where Meadow Brook comes out of it, that it would be considered to stop being perennial at that point and therefore have buffer zone from the bank of the pond moving on. Although Winnicott doesn't have an impoundment, I understand it's a tough question and it's on us to provide the answer to that. But we would still think that with the impoundment in place and the lack of primarily riverine characteristics, not just any characteristic that could be considered as such, but primarily seeing we have that paucity of those features that in this instance, Meadowbrook Pond as it has previously been, should continue to be considered a pond.
Now, you said that Meadowbrook does not have an impoundment? I thought it does. I thought there are boards.
No, I may have misspoke. I meant although Winnicott doesn't. I know that Meadowbrook certainly does. I don't think Winnicott does. I
thought
knew
there was,
there. I don't think so. I know it goes into the Snake River under the bridge there, but
yes, but well, all right. I mean, that's a moot point. I know historically, Winnicott is a natural pond, and was there historically before there was a huge amount of land alteration. But I just in terms of all of these areas that have been impounded, it was my understanding that the area under the water body that is restricted from natural flow no longer has the riverfront applied to it. So I'm not sure, I don't understand why this is being discussed in this manner. Maybe someone could help me with that.
I guess just because it's not, an impoundment wouldn't be a pond if it has riverine characteristics currently. If it has no flow, then it's likely a pond. But I've never seen, a reliance on just this orange peel test for a minute. If it's low flow, you're not going to get that by just observing it for a minute. So I'm simply relying on my previous experience, and there have been water bodies labeled as ponds in this state that are not considered ponds for purposes of the Wetlands Protection Act. That they are, in fact, they do have riverine characteristics and therefore are considered rivers. So
you're saying that, well, all these ponds have to have some flow. Otherwise, I suppose if the water goes down enough, the flow is going into the water table. But at what point do we define? I mean, you're not saying that every pond has no flow, are you? I just don't.
It has to be observable or measurable.
It has to be unidirectional as well.
It has to be unidirectional.
But potentially, the flow, the actual water flow or water movement is going to be slow enough that it's going to be obscured by any kind of measuring device on the surface that is impacted by wind. So you would have to have I mean, to me, I don't know how we can define the pond portion as riverine if there's not substantial flow that we can observe grossly.
And the regulations do state primarily riverine characteristics, including unidirectional flow. So it's not necessarily the end all be all, the flow, although it is a good indicator. There's no undercut banks in this pond. There's no vegetation along the sides or anything. There's no there's no real indication that this area is or has been treated as a river. So we are including riverfront as part of the proposal. As a reminder, we are including that from the impoundment on, as the river doesn't flow underground for more than 200 feet. So we have to include it at that point. We would also include it if the project extended to the further west. But as you remember, we're impacting a very small portion of this parcel, relatively speaking, insofar as it's a very big parcel. And in terms of all of the riverfront on site, I think there was, off the top of my head, I think there was something like 1 million square feet of riverfront area if we draw it off of just those portions of the USGS. So we would be impacting an extremely small portion, but I would have to agree that the lack of primarily riverine characteristics lead us, in our professional opinion, to maintain that this area is a pond.
Would DEP define this as a pond or riverine?
Well, if DEP is referencing the definition in the Wetlands Protection Act, I would think they would refer to it as a pond, being as it's labeled as such on the most recent USGS map. And with the evidence that we've provided, I would think that would be sufficient for them to consider a lack of primarily riverine characteristics. I would think if I tossed that banana peel in the water and it floated 10 feet down within the 2 minutes that I looked at it, then then that would warrant further discussion. However, seeing as though that's not the case, I don't think that we still maintain that it's a pond.
If I may, it seems to me it would be a pity should we find ourselves here again having the same question about whether it's a pond or a river. I know it was asked at, if not the last meeting, then the meeting before that, whether or not the Conservation Commission has a flow meter, and or how does one acquire a flow meter? Rented? Is it difficult to rent, or I don't know, buy even? And could someone go out there and stick the thing in the water?
But I don't see how that would help. I mean, where would you put it?
And maybe that wouldn't help. I don't know. It just seems to me, like.
I mean, if you put the flow meter in the portion of the brook before the pond, it's going to register a number. And if you put it at the outflow, it's going to register a number. And if you put it in the middle of the pond, I mean, is that how you decide? I don't.
Yeah, what's to say that it wouldn't register a number in the middle of the pond?
Well, it's a matter of the movement of water in a restricted banking area versus a very, very broad cross section. The flow is by geometry going to be markedly reduced in the middle of the pond. And at what number do you decide, okay, it's a pond and not a river?
And there is no exact number in the Wetlands Protection Act that I am aware of that states that you need to have X amount of flow as measured by a flow meter.
Okay, well,
that would be a difficult issue to tackle as well.
I just
question.
Opinion from the conservation director is that you've got a man-made impoundment that is keeping the water at bay, aka the dam. I just don't know how useful a flow meter is going to be. If you open up that dam, the flow meter is going to run high. If you close the dam, it's going to run low. So, I mean, I just don't know what the flow meter is going to do depending on how you have that dam in operation. So that's going to really skew your results.
So then
it is the intention. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so then the dam is as much of an issue, if not more, than whether this body of water is a pond or a river. Is that correct, or do I misunderstand? Which wouldn't be the first time.
Well, that is correct. The impoundment is key in the determination here. But it's my understanding, based on discussions with the applicant, that there's no intention to remove the boards or open up the floodgates, literally. It's the intention to sell these houses once they're constructed with waterfront views, so that whoever buys them can go recreate and canoe in the pond and such, which would be, and fish, and it'd be substantially different if we removed the boards and turned it into a river.
In which case, the thing should we not be thinking about is how to put language in an order of conditions to make sure that it stays that way.
So we had previous discussions with Jennifer on this, and she wanted to see that a homeowners association be established for those properties, so that it would be their responsibility to manage the dam, if I remember correctly. And that is in process.
So they all would file with the state? Is that how it would happen? Or the homeowners association would file with the state for the annual maintenance report?
Is the question whether or not it would be the association itself or each individual?
Yeah, that's the question.
I would, off the top of my head, I would think it would be the association, because it's going to be a shared entity, and I see the applicant is nodding along with me as well. That's not particularly a discussion with his attorneys that I've been heavily involved in at this point. But if the commission's interested in receiving more information on how the impoundment would be managed in perpetuity, we're happy to provide that. But nonetheless,
I think it would be helpful, Tim, to be honest with you.
but in its we're making our proposal based on the existing conditions of the dam and the proposed future conditions, and that we don't want to remove it and turn it into a river. If we did, there's no doubt that there would be unidirectional flow and riverine characteristics, albeit perhaps not primarily, but that's not the case here. And we're hoping that the commission would consider it to make their decision based on the existing conditions, and those conditions that we proposed maintain it as.
Yeah, I don't think we want to restrict what will happen in the future. We don't know what's going to happen to the dam, and so I'm not sure we want to do that. But
well,
we want to make sure that it's maintained while it's there.
Certainly, and the information we can get from how we're going to have the HOA set up, et cetera, we can absolutely provide. But in its existing conditions, we plan to just leave it as such, as a pond for ice skating and all the other recreational uses of it.
So I guess my last comment here is just to note that the pond itself is artificially, I guess, managed because, for instance, of the dam structure that's in place. And I'm just going to read verbatim what the Act states about natural stream courses. It says rivers and streams that are perennial under natural conditions but are significantly affected by drawdown from withdrawals of water supply wells, direct withdrawals, impoundments, or other human man-made flow reductions or diversions shall be considered perennial. So I just want to leave the commission with that.
All right. So at this point, I guess it's still not a settled issue as to whether we're going to consider it a pond versus having riverfront requirement.
Well, and in that, I'm sorry.
Well, go ahead.
I was just going to ask for clarification. If the issue is not settled, it seems that the only outstanding problem that the commission had would be the use of a flow meter, but then there was repeated disagreements on the applicability of that here. So at this point, we've cited the regulations, we've included previous examples and USGS maps. We're not sure exactly what further information the commission would require to make a well-informed decision at this point. And we would to ask for clarity.
I guess I don't know if each commission member wants to decide. Sam, I see you have your hand up, and we'll get to you in just a second. I mean, I can only offer my opinion. I can only speculate in the writing of the law that ponds are areas where the flow goes way down because of the way the water is spread out by whether it be an impoundment or the natural lay of the land. And to me, it's not a difficult question. And I mean, I can see if the body of water where the river spreads out. I know there are certain rivers that have narrow channels, and then by the way it goes out onto various geography, the channel can become very wide. And yet, the Mississippi certainly has examples of that, and we wouldn't consider the wide areas a pond. But this is a little different than that. So, I don't know if Tim, I can help because we're a commission of individuals.
Is this something that we could vote on, Julian? Like,
I don't think we can vote on it in the middle of a information gathering hearing, but this is kind of issue we can discuss during deliberations.
So we could, if the commission would be comfortable with entertaining a roll call vote, if they feel they've had enough information at this point, just as sort of an informal indication of we're going to consider it a pond or we're not, so that we can plan accordingly with all the stormwater revisions, if the commission is comfortable with that. But, we've been happy to, the applicant's been very happy to work with the commission on all his revisions and all of Mr. Chessia's in-depth revisions as well. We want to do this the right way and we want to make the correct determination. We're just in our opinion, we've provided the evidence that the Wetlands Protection Act would require to make a determination as such. And if there's commission feels that they don't have enough information at this point, external of what we have submitted in accordance with the regulations, then we'd be happy to entertain further discussions on that. But I understand, you're just you're a commission of people, and you're not certain on exactly what's required further than what we have.
Yeah, I can add. I just got off jury duty, so talk about determining procedure. So, but I don't know if there's a place for a roll call vote in the middle of a public hearing. I think we have to discuss this at some point, but I don't know if this is the place. To me, it's, I don't want to sway things, but I don't see any confusion here myself. And I don't know if I would almost have to see examples of where an area that might be considered a pond was actually a river. Also considered requiring riverfront placement. So, I don't see that in this particular case, but other people on the commission may have differing views. So can we, I guess we have stormwater issues with that are still under discussion, but is there more discussion that we need to put forth with this question?
So just as a reminder, there is still the floodplain discussion as well before we continue in terms of that. But in regards to the river, I suppose I just wanted to clarify that we still hope to discuss the floodplain as well tonight.
Maybe we can proceed with that. Does anyone have any more comments about riverine characteristics? Sam had a question. I think now's the time, Sam.
Yes, good evening, members of the board, members of the community. Essentially, I just want to put out there that Chartley Pond is also a man-made dam from Chartley Brook. Barrows Pond is a man-made dam from Wading River. So it's like, was there ever a flow meter established from those with any applicants that put in for anything? And then going off of what Mr. Thomas cited, where does that, confusion come into my prospective project? And we sent that along. I believe, Tim, you have that.
Yes, that was
on
submitted
your screen.
Well.
Can you pull that up?
Yeah. Yeah, just give me 1 second.
So just like other things in town, it was dammed up back in the 1800s to about 1941. And there's a little history about it right here, and it's for the ice industry. So if you kind of, this comes from I believe Norton's own website. This is a little history of it. So this is one of the larger ponds in Norton. It's the only privately owned one. So seeing that the town of Norton owns the other major bodies of water, if you're considering your dammed up bodies of water to be ponds, how is that not the same here? So if you scroll up a little, Tim, I believe it's page 2. Down. There we go. So, Meadowbrook Pond is privately owned and does not have access open to the public. So I just think that's where there needs to be an understanding that, what is a flow meter going to do if you guys don't even tell us where to put it. It's just for me, it's a little difficult. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to say that I think the only point of this discussion is, do we need to apply riverfront requirements? And if ultimately the commission says we do, then that's something that would have to be confirmed by DEP in order for our decision to have any regulatory weight. And that's why I say, what would the DEP, how would the DEP weigh in on this? And often when the commission has gone out on a particular viewpoint in the past, which we have sometimes felt strongly about, DEP has not had the same interpretation. So that would be the ultimate issue that's on the table.
Well, is the rest of, we've heard a lot of input from Julian, Mr. Chairman, and Kerry as well. Is the rest of the commission, I'm just curious where the rest of the commission is falling on this issue.
I've been back and forth multiple times on this, but just something I'm sure everybody noticed and understands, but Meadowbrook is significantly smaller than the next largest pond or water body in Norton. It is listed as a pond, but as far as acreage goes, it is 13 and Chartley would be 37. So
that is a good point. However, I would remark that the Wetlands Protection Act states that ponds are anything greater than 10,000 square feet. So although comparatively with what else we have in town, there are some big ponds, it's still greater than that threshold as outlined in the Wetlands Protection Act.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think part of our deliberation, if it comes to this, is going to be whether or not, if we consider this a pond, whether DEP would agree with that, because the applicant, it appears, feels it is a pond, and if we consider it not a pond, it would obviously be appealed. So that's what's on the table. So I don't know how much more we can illuminate this with further discussion. And you were going to talk about floodplain?
That's correct. So just so that I'm clear, is there any, no pun intended, but direction for the applicant at this point moving forward? It just seems that the commission is split and isn't sure of what else we could provide to further strengthen our case or disprove it. So, it's
yes. Well, all right. This is kind of an area we haven't been required to deal with in a public hearing process. I don't know. John, do you think there's a place for doing a straw vote? I mean, unfortunately.
I wouldn't do a straw vote. I would deliberate amongst yourselves and discuss and come to some sort of consensus. But I would not do a roll call vote for this. You can weigh in with all the members to see what they feel. The applicant has obviously provided information. Whether you think that, a flow meter is required to, put the nail in the coffin on this one, then so be it. But at the same point, I mean, I think they've provided information. It's just that there is some language in the act that I had some questions regarding.
Well, I guess, I mean, I'll be blunt and say I personally can't support defining this as not a pond. And I guess we need to look at the language that you're referring to in part of our deliberation discussions as to whether or not that language applies in this setting. So can we potentially, and we need to include Lisa in this. So I think this is going to have to move forward to the continuation part, and we can try to address this.
So would the commission address this external of a public hearing and get back to us with their thoughts?
So they cannot collaborate because of open meeting law. So for instance, they'll all have to talk to me individually.
Okay. And then we'll continue discussions with you, John?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we have to define if we are going to make the case that this is not a pond and that the riverfront is going to apply as to what the qualities are that would allow members to reach that conclusion. And then, the vice versa. And I think we can define that through John, and then decide if there's any further reason to consider it requiring riverfront boundaries. So I think if we go ahead with floodplain discussion, would that be helpful at this point?
Certainly, and hope we can. I can bring up the site plans again. So just kind of as a reminder of what I had previously mentioned, we've provided. There's no established floodplain on site, so therefore it is the applicant's responsibility to demonstrate it. We're saying that it's at 62.5, which we believe is a more conservative estimate than what the regulations allow, which is the previous. I can pull back the language up so I can cite it verbatim. It is when it's not available, that it can be demonstrated based on observations from a credible source. So we have the letter, we've submitted a signed letter from a neighbor in which he states that the highest level of the pond he's shown to the surveyors, which we've shot in at 61.7, elevation 61.7. The average high water of the pond from survey is at 61.9. So extremely close to what the abutter has confirmed in the field. We're not just using one or the other, we're using both in conjunction with each other and still making it more conservative, pushing floodplain up to elevation 62.5. So it's, as a reminder, we're not impacting any wetlands. We don't anticipate flood concerns as a result of this project. I'm just trying to find the site plans I had up. Yep. The vast majority of this project occurs outside of the buffer zone. Only one of the houses in its entirety occurs within the buffer zone, along with several of the stormwater features that are subject to change with these revisions. However, we're not anticipating putting the limit of work any closer to the wetland resource areas. And at the very closest point of work, I believe, which is only a very small portion, is about 27 feet or 26 feet. So still all work outside of the town's 25-foot no disturb policy. We believe that those undisturbed buffers would curb any issues of flooding associated with the proposed construction, and that the elevation that we're proposing to be the floodplain elevation is based on credible evidence from us as the professionals. Are there any questions in regards to this?
Tim, I have one question for you. Is the floodplain contour up gradient of all the wetland flags?
I believe so. Yes.
Then I'm comfortable with it if that's the case, because your maximum flood level is probably going to be that wetland line.
Yes, I believe that is the average elevation of the wetland.
There were no other observed areas where there was any extent of flooding up gradient of that wetland line?
No, not up gradient of the wetland line. All
right, so that sounds somewhat sufficient to establishing the floodplain for that area.
And your elevation of your construction, what is the lowest elevation of the construction?
Lowest off the top of my head, I'm not sure. The closest point on a 2D scale is approximately here. So let's see, we've got above elevation 64, certainly. Because over here, we get up into the higher elevation, 66, even all the way up to 70. So even still, we're above that, the conservative estimate.
And that involves that single structure within the buffer zone. Is that correct? It looks like it does.
So there's more than one structure occurring in the buffer zone, but that point that I was referring to, so we have a couple of corners of the houses and stormwater features, just as clarification, and parts of the road as well. But yes, the limit of work is above that and away from that at its lowest point topographically.
And so you're 62.5, and your number here looks like 66 is the bottom elevation of one of the duplexes. So
Correct.
you're about four feet above floodplain in your final construction.
Correct. And again, the vast majority of the site is kept outside, very well outside of buffer zone, and it's an extremely large property. The pond itself, I don't have an ortho up in front of me, but the whole property extends all the way back here and encapsulates a lot of these wetlands to the west. There's a lot of undisturbed land around this pond as well. We're only coming in over here. So we, as stated, we don't think that there should be any issues with having the floodplain shown as such.
All right. Any further questions from members of the audience or commission members? Still under review are the stormwater issues.
That's correct. We submitted some responses, more updates from Margaret Bacon, who's working through the stormwater comments from John Chesia, with clarity on these issues. With the floodplain is a big one. Once we can sort of nail down whether it's a pond, whether it's a river, then we'll continue working through the stormwater aspects of the project.
So just to remind the commission, with the tenure of this project being back in early January, our peer review consultant has exhausted all the supplemental funds for his peer review services. So once this riverfront and I guess environmental concerns get ironed out, they can do their stormwater analysis, and hopefully at the next meeting we can figure out how much time he's going to need to provide additional review.
All right. So is this something we're continuing until our next meeting, which I believe is the 13th of December?
Well, I would ask if the commission believes that that's enough time to discuss their opinions, do their own research in the pond with John Thomas. If so, we're happy to continue to the 3rd.
I personally think we can resolve this issue by the next meeting without any difficulty.
Yeah, I do as well.
So is the applicant comfortable with a continuation motion now? Or any further questions from the audience or other participants?
Sam, does that sound good? The 13th?
Yeah, whatever works for everybody works for me.
All right. So we can entertain a motion that the hearing for file number 250-1070 be continued until our next meeting, which is December 13th.
I'll move that we continue file number 250-1070 until December 13th.
Second.
And we have a motion made by Carrie and seconded by Ron. We'll do a roll call vote, starting with Ron and Jim.
Aye.
And Gene? Aye. And now we have Dan Doyle and Dan Pearson.
Aye.
Dan Pearson appears frozen. So we'll go.
I'll vote aye.
And I'll throw in an aye. I don't know, is Dan still with us? We'll have to find out. All right,
I
well,
was back.
Here I am. Sorry,
okay, excellent.
I to both. Something went wrong with my my feed. I apologize.
You must have Verizon.
In fact, I do.
Yes. All right, motion carries. Thank you, Tim, and everyone else who
Thank you
participated.
very much.
Our next hearing is DP file number 250-1088 concerning 142 East Main Street, Emerson Martins. And this is continued from our last hearing on November 8th. So we have a representative of the applicant, I'm assuming.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Hope you're not sick of the sound of my voice at this point. Tim McGuire from Goddard Consulting here on behalf of Emerson Martins, joined as well by Craig Siganowski from RIM. So essentially, at the terminus of the last meeting, we had left off with the commission asking for some invasive species management to be proposed for the project. So I can do a screen share showing what was submitted. I received word this morning that the town had some issues receiving my invasive species management plan as the attachment size was large. As soon as that was brought to our attention, we submitted that in a smaller format and the commission received it and has hopefully had an opportunity to review it. As a reminder, the proposed project involves the expansion of an existing landscape materials stockpile yard into buffer zone, with all work being maintained outside of the town's 25-foot no disturb policy. So on site, the property boundary is right here. There are some invasive species, everything from barberry to knotweed, oriental bittersweet, etc. So we've proposed a plan to manage those, involving essentially removing everything between the new fence and the property line, insofar as the new fence expands to the north. And we're just proposing to remove all of that through hand pulling, other methods, including herbicide application as applicable by a licensed herbicide applicator. It's the wish of the applicant to have this essentially be a one-time treatment of invasives and not a condition that would require any additional work from him in perpetuity due to funding. If the commission has any questions in regards to this, we're happy to entertain them at this time. Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh,
Tim,
I should add, my apologies. I should add that after the invasives will be removed, we're proposing to add a New England conservation seed mix. We're adding 6 inches of topsoil and the seed mix as well.
so the one question I had was, so where's the stockpile of soil going to go? Is it the whole area that's in purple?
The 6 inches of topsoil to be added
Yeah.
across this whole area as shown in purple.
So the whole purple hatch is going to be placed with soil on top once you remove all the invasive species. Is that correct?
Correct. To be
Okay.
brought from off-site, as the quantity of invasives on site,
Okay.
it would be very productive to reuse soils.
So what my one question is, how are you going to, I guess, remove the plants? Like, what's the schedule? When do you plan on doing all the work?
I would think that the applicant wants to get this done as soon as possible.
Okay, so you plan on doing it in the winter, obviously, right?
I could discuss that with him to confirm. He's on the meeting. Emerson, if approved, would that be a reasonable timeline for you to start in the winter?
Yes, whatever is necessary, we're going to be able to do if winter is appropriate.
Well, I think it does state kind of, if the species were identified on site, that there are certain periods in time when these species are best removed, whether it's hand removed or applied with herbicide or treatment of what is being proposed. So, I mean, it would be nice to kind of see a sheet of, what the plan is for each specific species. So that way we have an understanding, and kind of a general understanding of where the dominance is of all these species would be good too.
So it's pretty much, it's the hope of the applicant to do it all at once. I don't see any problem with doing this in the winter time for these species. It's all woody herbaceous species, like I said, not necessarily woody for the knotweed, but there's barberry out there. It's all things that are readily identifiable in the wintertime as well.
All right. And is he going to hire a contractor that specializes in this, or is he going to use Goddard Consulting?
He would use us, I would think, to do the supervision of the area in terms of the actual removal. I'm not sure if he has his own landscape guys, or any herbicide application that would be necessary would need to be done in accordance with this plan with a licensed herbicide applicator.
Okay. We're probably going to condition that person be named, and we get their contact information, obviously.
Certainly.
Other than that, I have no other questions.
Okay.
All right. Any questions from commission members? And if not, just reviewing the participants list, I don't see any hands up.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I understand that sometimes monitoring is a condition, a standard condition from the commission. I just want to clarify that that's not something that the applicant is interested in this time. We're hoping to just have this be a one and done for his own finances. And I just wanted to confirm that that wouldn't be something that kind of slides under the radar as a standard condition.
I mean, he's going to have to retrieve a certificate of compliance once all work's done. So as long as the area is free of the area that's being identified on the plan is free of all invasive species and it's done to completeness, I don't see that being an issue.
Okay.
All right. John, as I understand it, all the information needed to close this has been submitted.
That's correct.
So unless there are further questions, we can consider a motion to close the public hearing for file number 250-1088, 142 East Main Street.
Mr. Chairman, I will make a motion to close the public hearing on DEP file, 250-1088.
Second.
We have a motion made by Dan Pearson, seconded by Dan Doyle. So we'll do a roll call vote, beginning with Ron and Gene.
Aye.
And Gene, you're still muted. Gene, how do you vote? That's an aye. And now we have Dan Pearson and Dan Doyle.
Aye.
Aye.
And Carrie and myself, I'll throw in an
Aye.
aye. And we have an aye. So motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything.
You're very welcome. And
Have a nice Thanksgiving.
You
Happy
too.
Thanksgiving.
All right, so next item is DP file number 250-1082, a notice of intent for 0 Leonard Street. And this is a project that's been before us multiple times, and we have a representative of the applicant.
Hi, good evening. Brandon Carr with the Preed Engineering. I'm here with Jeff and Don O'Neill, who are the applicants for the project. I think as the commission's familiar, the proposal is for 2 buildings. I'll share my screen here. I think I have to be allowed to share my screen, but the proposal is
You're all set, Brandon. Sorry about that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
So it's proposal is for 2 industrial warehouse buildings off of Leonard Street. So as we talked about before, there's a road extension coming off Leonard Street. You go past the first buildings out at Blue Star. When Leonard Street takes kind of a curve to the right, this road would come in the first about 1,700 feet of it to a cul-de-sac approximately here. Were approved by the commission earlier this year. And then this application basically takes that road that previously ended here, extends it about approximately 450 feet and proposes the two buildings that you see, the building 9 being a 200,000 square foot and building 12 being a 60,000 square foot, both high bay warehouse facilities. Building 9 does have a office and small, by showing only, retail component. The work proposed is within the buffer zone. So on the southern side here, you can see this area. On the southern side here is a BVW. So there's part of the proposed road is located within the 100-foot buffer. And then on the western side here, part of Ponds D are located in the 100-foot buffer. And then on the eastern side, I guess northeastern side here, closer to Janet Street, there's some work proposed in the 100-foot buffer. For the most part, other than the road here and a little bit of this parking area here, the work proposed in the buffers is mostly just grading and stormwater management areas. No work proposed within the riverbank or no flood compensation associated with this current application. So since we were before you, I believe 2 weeks ago, we've gone back and forth a couple, maybe 1 or 2 more times with Horsley Witten, who's doing a peer review for both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. Plan on making our kind of final submission to them tomorrow. They had a couple, some minor stormwater comments and updates. They wanted some documentation added to the operation and maintenance plans and a clarification on one of the phosphorus removal calcs. I think I can speak for them saying that I think with those slight tweaks, we meet all the Mass Stormwater Handbook requirements as well as the Town of Norton bylaw requirements. So it's really nothing has changed other than some of the documentation, but nothing on the plans has changed since I believe you saw it last. So that's really kind of the only update I have. So I was wondering, if the board and the commission has any questions, be, obviously here to discuss them. But we hope to be kind of wrapping this up and, reaching a conclusion of the public hearings.
All right. John, as I assume you've been involved in reviewing what's going back and forth, but there's still some issues to be worked out between Horsley and Witten and your group, and that's almost resolved, you're saying?
Yeah, so we got their last review. So we got a review from them beginning of last week, I believe, and there was maybe 5 or 6 comments related to the storm within the Concom's kind of purview. There were some planning comments and landscaping, but within related to stormwater, there was about maybe 5 or 6 comments. Nothing that really changes the design, mostly documentation. And like I said, we're responding to those both to the Planning Board and Horsley Witten and the Commission, Conservation Commission tomorrow. But I think at that point, we've pretty much satisfied their review, especially with the stormwater and kind of wetlands related items.
And I read the comments today from Horsley Witten, and Brandon's spot on with his assessment. Horsley and Witten was comfortable with most of the wetlands work and whatnot that's going on. It's just some of the minor stuff that has to do with the stormwater modifications.
All right, so I think unless there are further questions or comments, then we can continue this and then expect resolution to the point of possibly closing this on our next meeting. Is that your thought?
Yeah, that's what I think what could potentially happen.
Is there a way that the public hearing process, Julian, could be closed this evening? And then the order of conditions would go through the next phase?
It might be more than 21 days, right? Sorry, Julian, but.
No, it actually is exactly 21 days on the 13th. It's our next meeting. It goes beyond the 21 days. But I think it would be difficult to, unless John Thomas is totally comfortable with the idea that the major issues are resolved and that we're going to have an order of conditions without any question for our next meeting to.
I mean, any minor modification to a plan we wouldn't be able to, they'd have to come back and file. So, I mean, that's the risk that you run when you close something prematurely. So it may be in the applicant's best interest just to hold off, 2 weeks and then get closure the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
John, could we work with you on starting to draft the order of conditions and maybe have it ready for the next hearing?
I will have the draft order conditions drafted up in anticipation of the next meeting.
Okay, perfect.
That will streamline things. So unless there are further questions or comments, let me just take a look at the participants list to see if anybody has their hand up. And I do not see that. So we can consider a motion to continue the public hearing for 0 Leonard Street, DP file number 250-1082, continue it until December 13th.
So
Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to make that motion to continue the hearing for file 250-1082 to the December 13th meeting.
And
All right, we have a motion made by Dan Doyle and
I'll second.
John and Jean.
Aye.
And Jean, you're still on mute, so your vote is aye or nay. That was an aye. And Carrie and Dan Pearson.
Aye.
aye.
And now Dan Doyle and who am I missing here?
Aye.
Maybe just me. Did I miss anybody's vote? I don't think I did. So I'll throw in an aye too. So thank you, everyone. And we'll
Thank you.
resume discussion on December 13th.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
All right, our next item is item D, DEP file number 250-1081. It's an ANRAD 0 Barrow Street. And we have a representative of the applicant.
Hi, my name's Ron Strosa from Oxbow Associates. I'm representing the applicant, who's also on the call, David Levy.
Okay.
I'm just going to share my screen. Oh,
Go ahead, Ron. Your co-host now.
So at the previous hearing, we had discussed adjustments made to the plan. We were still waiting on Art Allen from Ecotech to review the site plan, as we just received it the same day that we presented last time. He has responded with his comments that I believe you guys have received from John. He didn't, as far as I could tell, he didn't see any issues with the amendments made to the plan. And Lisa had some questions regarding the FEMA floodplain line and how it was digitized on the map. So this Zone A floodplain line. It was actually on the plan over here, and I just didn't notice it because I didn't review it long enough to realize it. But it does say it was digitized from the FEMA floodplain map that was updated in 2015. Like I said, I was out there in April of 2021 flagging it, so probably around peak high water period. And I did not see it, above the wetland line anywhere on the site. And Art also responded in his comments that he did not see the floodplain line, the BLSF above the depicted floodplain. And I'll let you guys comment if you have any additional comments on it.
So,
So
yeah, go ahead.
I have read through Art's comment letter, and I'm in agreement with his comments. I think this project and the delineation is accurate, and that the commission has the ability to close this and issue a order of resource area delineation to deliberate on.
All right. So any further questions from commission members? And I don't see any hands up in the participants list. So unless there are further questions, we can consider a motion to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to close the public hearing on file DEP 250-1081.
All right. We have a motion to close the hearing. And, we need a second.
Second.
I think Carrie weighed in just a few milliseconds before Ron. So roll call vote, starting with Ron and
Aye.
Gene. For whatever reason, your audio is not coming through. So is that an aye?
Me? Aye.
Yeah, we have a aye from Dan Pearson, Dan Doyle, and Carrie.
Aye.
And I'll throw in an aye. So the motion carries to close the public hearing. And I think we have an ORAD to consider later. All right, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank you.
And it looks like that, oh no, we have 0 Pine Street. So item E is DP file number 250-1084, also an ANRAD. And well, I guess we still have some peer review issues. Do we have a representative, or did
They
they
actually requested a continuance.
Okay. All right, I can consider such a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to continue 250-1084 to the December 13th meeting of the Conservation Commission.
I'll second that.
We have a motion made by Dan Pearson, seconded by Dan Doyle. We'll start again with Gene and Ron.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and now Dan Pearson and Carrie.
Aye.
Aye.
And Dan Doyle and myself.
Aye.
And I'll throw in an aye. Motion carries. This hearing is continued to December 13th. And that brings us to a request for, certificate of compliance for 117 Lincoln Street. So this is for file number 250-1020, which is not very old. So what was the nature of the project? Was it a septic system repair?
It was a single family residence. I can pull it up 1 second.
Because the plan that was provided labels the house and paved driveway as existing, unless this is an as-built.
So this was the as-built. I wasn't here when you did this project, but I guess it was a existing house, and the gentleman did some extension work in the back for the yard. He had to put in a split rail fence, and he put a deck on the back portion.
Okay.
So he was just coming in for a certificate of compliance for the work. Ultimately, it looks like it was with the proposed plan. There are a few minor modifications that I was willing to work with him on, but ultimately, I'd say it's all stabilized. So I'm willing to, provide the commission my stamp of approval for this gentleman to receive his certificate of compliance.
Any questions or comments from members of the commission? And if not, we can consider a motion to issue the certificate of compliance.
I'll make the motion to issue a certificate of compliance for DEP file number 250-1020.
Motion made by Dan Doyle and seconded by?
Second.
Seconded by Ron. So roll call vote. Jeannie, Ken, Ron, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Jean, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Dan Doyle and Carrie?
Aye.
Aye.
And Dan Pearson,
Aye.
and I'll throw in an aye. So the motion carries. We have issued the certificate of compliance for file number 250-1020. And file number 250-840, a fairly older request. And I assume the work was done quite a while ago because this was before us a year or two ago for a certificate of compliance of the tree trimming on 300 South Washington Street.
That's correct. I think Jeff O'Neill and Don O'Neill are here. They were seeking a certificate of compliance just to close out the project as they were required to under their order conditions. I have no issues on this as the work was done and it appears to be done in accordance with what was being proposed at the time.
All right. So we can consider a motion.
I'll make the motion to issue a certificate of compliance for 250-640.
Second.
840. And the second came from Carrie, was it? All right. So motion made by Dan Doyle, seconded by Carrie. Roll call vote again, starting with Ron and Jean.
Aye.
Aye.
And then Dan Doyle and Carrie.
Aye.
And Dan Pearson.
Aye.
And I'll throw in an aye, so the motion carries. We issued certificate of compliance for file number 250-840.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Happy holiday.
Happy holidays. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
And,
Thank you.
and then our next item is issuing order of conditions, I assume, for 53 Clapp Street. Oh, no, it's an order of conditions. Is that correct?
Yes, that was from last meeting, was to issue the order conditions today. So
right.
in the packet is the special conditions I listed out. If anybody has any questions, feel free to comment.
So the bulk of the special conditions is boilerplate, it appears.
Yes, it is boilerplate. And basically, I just tried to provide a little bit more, consistency with the information that was being provided.
Yeah, to me, very comprehensive. And I didn't have any, there was nothing that I would recommend changing. Did anybody else have any comments? And if not, we can go ahead and consider a motion to issue the order of conditions for file number 250-1087 as drafted.
I'll make a motion to issue the order of conditions for file number DEP number 250-1087, 53 Clap Street, as drafted.
Second.
Motion made by Carrie, seconded by Ron. Roll call vote, starting with Ron and Carrie.
Aye.
Aye.
Dan Pearson and Jean.
Yes. Aye.
Aye.
And Dan Doyle.
Aye.
And I'll throw in an aye. So the motion carries to issue the orders of conditions as drafted for file number 250-1087. And then we have, I thought we had an ORAD to issue, did we not?
Yes, 250-1081, Zero Barrow Street, DeSuco as a Realty Trust.
Yeah, it's not on my agenda unless I
No,
overlooked
it wasn't on the agenda because it wasn't presented at the meeting previously, but you did make a decision on it. So I don't know how you want to handle that. Do you want me to tentatively put things on there, or do you want me just to?
Well, it falls under our category of open session.
Mhm.
But technically, it's not really even an open session. It's a continuation, and it's very short. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to review it, but it basically is all of the special conditions delineating it relates to the plan, and then it relates all of the flags, and then the administrative condition is no work is approved by this order. So anyone have any questions about the wording? If not, we can consider a motion to issue an order of resource area delineation for file number 250-1081.
I'll move that we issue the ORAD for file number DEP 250-1081 for Zero Barrow Street.
I'll second.
All right, motion made by Carrie, seconded by Dan Pearson, beginning with Ron and Carrie. How do you vote?
Aye.
And Dan Pearson and Jean, how do you vote?
Aye.
Aye.
And Dan Doyle, and I'll throw in an aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
So we have Matt Ladwig here from ESS Group. He wanted to give a presentation on the Norton Ponds.
Yes, and this is a continuation of the vegetation treatment plan. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Yes.
All right. Why don't you go ahead with that?
Matt, you have sharing capabilities.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for your time this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Now we're sure they're not rivers, right?
That was a healthy debate. Yeah. All right. Hopefully everybody can see this here. So my name is Matt Ladwig. I'm a certified lake manager with ESS Group. And just to bring everybody on the same page, ESS has been handling the monitoring of Lake Winnicott, Norton Reservoir, and Chartley Pond for the past several years, and also helping to guide their management under the existing orders of conditions that the commission has issued for those projects. So as a requirement for those projects, we have to provide an annual update on what we saw and what we're recommending for the next year. So that's what we're doing tonight. So I'll try to make this quick but informative. Just give everybody an overview. The monitoring that we did this year consisted of 2 vegetation surveys. So basically we did either an early season or pre-treatment vegetation mapping that happened in May or June. And the difference between the two is if we treated the pond, we call it pre-treatment. Otherwise, we just call it early season. And then we did a late season and post-treatment vegetation mapping event in September of this year. We did actually also have one additional thing that we had to do this year as a natural heritage requirement. For Lake Winnicott, we had to monitor water quality, specifically dissolved oxygen and temperature from April to September. And I'll provide a little bit more information on that in another slide. So just as an overview of the management actions we actually took this year at Winnicott, we didn't do anything this year. So we didn't do any treatments. Norton Reservoir was treated with diquat and flumioxazin. And the number that's shown here, 90 acres, that's a total for both of them. It's not 90 acres each. And that was completed both in June and August. It was kind of a split treatment. Essentially, they went out, treated in June, and then saw that there were some additional areas of growth in August and treated those at the direction of the town. They also completed a day of hand harvesting of water chestnut in August at Norton Reservoir. And then at Chartley, we did a sonar treatment, fluoridone treatment this year between June and August. So that was essentially a whole pond treatment, about 30 acres. And then we also did a day of hand harvesting there. And just so everybody's clear, the management work that's actually done here is undertaken by Solitude Lake Management under separate contract. So we're really just sort of monitoring what goes on and reporting to you and making recommendations for next year. So going back to Lake Winnicott, we have had to do dissolved oxygen monitoring before as a natural heritage requirement, but usually it happens in concert with a treatment that's undergoing, being done that year. This year, they just wanted us to get a year of baseline data. So basically we went out and did what we would normally do, just there was no treatment. So we completed 8 monitoring events at 4 locations throughout the pond. We did find that dissolved oxygen was actually lower than has been previously observed here. The reason for that is really not obvious to me. But in mid to late summer, we did have fairly low dissolved oxygen concentrations at a couple of locations where actually we were basically anoxic about a meter down in the water column. Some of it could have been additional respiration from, as you'll see, the regrowth of some of the dense plant beds that have afflicted this particular lake in the past years. There could have been something else going on with the weird weather we had this year. Unfortunately, this is really all we were collecting this year as the requirement for natural heritage. So we don't have all the information, but just kind of letting you know that that's what we saw. And I guess interestingly, it's lower than we've ever observed before during treatment years. So it definitely didn't seem to have anything to do with the treatment. And now moving on to what we actually found with the aquatic plant mapping. So if you'll remember, there's 2 aquatic plants in Lake Winnicott that we're managing actively. One is fanwort and the other one is variable leaf milfoil. These maps just show the milfoil. The reason for that being we didn't see any fanwort in June during our early season mapping. And you'll see here on the left, we did have some semblance of variable leaf milfoil returning to grow in the pond. It was treated last year, and the treatment seemed to be fairly successful, but you never really know till the next year. So we were starting to see some regrowth of these sparse patchy beds in the spring, but they really didn't take off until mid to late summer. And I know there were some complaints that came in from abutters to the lake this year, indicating that there was a lot of plant growth coming up, and we have the map to sort of back that up. Most of the growth was really restricted to these shallower areas around the margins of the pond. But we did have some growth of fanwort, which is not shown here, a little bit farther out away from the shoreline into deeper waters. And the only reason I didn't show fanwort here is because we've only had about 2 or 3 acres of that regrowth, and it was very sparse, but it was there, so it is coming back. All right, moving on to Norton Reservoir, which was treated this year. You'll see here on the left the conditions in May for the fanwort growth. It was fairly extensive, although a lot of the beds were still kind of sparse to patchy at that time. Just a reminder to the commission that fanwort tends to really get going later in the year. So even though it's definitely there and present in May, it still really hasn't filled out the typical bio volume and biomass that it puts into the water column at that point. When you would expect to see that would be September. And as you can see here in the main basin of Norton Reservoir, really actually knocked the beds back pretty well. There's only a few scattered areas here of growth remaining in September. Where we did see an increase in growth was down in that southernmost basin. It was actually treated, but they treated sort of the deeper areas. So it looks like some of the growth came back in those shallow coves on that southern basin. All right, same Norton Reservoir, but looking at different species, variable leaf milfoil. This is the other really big one that we're trying to control with the treatments. And this does come up a little bit earlier in the season than fanwort. And you can see here on the left, we had pretty widespread growth of variable leaf milfoil, although a lot of it was sparse to patchy, not super dense beds in May. And by the end of the season in September, we actually had reduced those beds quite significantly. We saw some increase in density in places that were not treated this year because we actually ended up using contact herbicides here rather than a widespread systemic herbicide treatment. But otherwise, the places that were treated seemed to respond fairly well. So we did see reduced growth of variable leaf milfoil when we went back in September. And then one of the plants that's not that widespread in Norton Reservoir, but definitely the biggest threat because of how it grows is water chestnut. And we did have several acres of growth this May when we went out, which was a little bit surprising. But you will note some of these are sparse beds. So even though we have a total here of 4.5 acres of sparse beds, that's really just kind of finding a scattered plant here or there in those areas. The ones that are really sort of problematic are these, patchy or dense beds. That's where you really start to notice the water chestnut is growing to the exclusion of other plants. So the good news there is they were able to get in and manually harvest most of these beds. You'll see there's a little bit of a remnant bed at the very apex of that cove in the southwestern basin. But for the most part, it looked like they did a pretty good job of hand harvesting that this year. So Chartley Pond, this is kind of a mystery to us this year. Last year we had done some spot treatments and had requested that the order of conditions be amended to allow us to try some systemic herbicides here. One that we actually had the ability to use was Sonar, which is fluoridone, and we've had very good results when we use that in Norton Reservoir in Lake Winnicott with multiple seasons of control. And we were hoping to see the same here in Chartley Pond because we have the same species essentially affecting this pond, fanwort and variable leaf milfoil. As you can see here, even though we started the treatment in June and completed by August, we actually ended up having more fanwort growth in September than we did during the pre-treatment survey in May. It's kind of a mystery why this would be the case. Typically, Sonar is extremely effective against fanwort. In fact, it's one of the few herbicides that is, which is why we used it. I suspect, and we won't really know until next year when we go back and map the regrowth, but I suspect that it had something to do with the very wet summer that we had, which may have diluted some of the applications. Sonar has to be kept up at a low level, but it has to be present in the water column for a fairly long period of time to actually have an impact on the target species. And so if we saw, a lot of flushing of the pond over the course of the summer, that could have reduced the effectiveness of it. I will say, even though we did see some of these patchier beds in September, a lot of them had chlorotic leaves, which is an indication that the herbicide actually was being taken up. It's just normally by that time we would expect the plants to have started dying back, not just be chlorotic. So we're not sure whether we'll see the same sustained results into next year as we had seen with our previous treatments of Norton Reservoir and Lake Winnicott, but we are hoping for the best. On the other hand, we did actually see better results with the variable leaf milfoil. Still not as great as we would have liked, but we did see a reduction there in terms of the extent of the beds, and we did seem to cut back on a lot of the denser beds, which is good. And then the really good news for this year is that even though we had some water chestnut remaining in the pond in May when we went out to do our survey, they actually did a great job of hand harvesting this, and we couldn't find any in September. In fact, the pond looked very good, lots of open water. If you hadn't been throwing a rake to try to map the other plants in the pond, you would have thought that it was in great shape. So I think we're making good progress on the water chestnut infestation in Chartley Pond, which is certainly a step in the right direction. And this chart is one that we update every year just to kind of give you a broader sense of how we're doing with our management. Is it working? Are we just throwing chemicals in and not getting anything out of it? Are we hand pulling and not getting anything out of it? And so really what you can see here is in 2017, which was the year that we initiated active management of these water bodies, we had a lot of the red dots, which means lots of extensive growth. And after we did those initial treatments in 2017, we really knocked things back pretty hard. And by 2018, we had much less density of the target species in Winnicott and Norton. At Chartley, the data is kind of skewed because the pond was actually drawn down for dam repairs that year. So we had to do estimates that were late in the season after the pond refilled. And it's likely that we didn't see as much as we would have during a normal year. And then as you look at 2019 and 2020, we do have some creeping back in of some of those plants that were problematic at Norton Reservoir and again at Winnicott Pond, which is why we reinitiated those treatments last year. And this year, we did see some improvement over last year. I think the big disappointment this year was just not seeing the immediate results at Chartley Pond that we were hoping to get. And just so everybody understands, these points actually represent the pre-treatment conditions. So we're trying to sort of index these by the same time of the year so that they're relatively comparable. So these actually reflect the conditions each year in the spring before any management is applied. So we are seeing gradual improvement. There's still a ways to go, but we've also actually, I don't want to say eradicated, but we've knocked back some of the plants that we knew of that were there. Norton Reservoir in particular with Eurasian milfoil and swollen bladderwort, and haven't seen them again since we were able to get rid of them back in 2020. So we're hoping that at least holds up and that we can tackle the rest of these plants as we move forward. So what do we recommend doing for next year? Well, at Winnicott, obviously the regrowth of those extensive beds really seems to necessitate another sonar treatment. We think we can do this effectively. One thing we do need to do, because our original approval from Heritage, even though it's an annual thing, requires refiling every 5 years. We are due to refile and obtain, an official determination letter from them again. So we are going to be submitting a MISA filing with Heritage. I don't anticipate having any issues with that, but obviously the commission will be kept in the loop as to the outcome of that filing. And then at Norton Reservoir, we are we're actually doing more of the same. I think we had pretty good effectiveness this year, and we don't really want to do an entire reservoir treatment if we don't need to. So I think we're going to try to go another year and see what we can get out of the spot treatments on the herbicide end, and then definitely continue to aggressively hand pull water chestnut so that we don't allow that to continue expanding in the reservoir. Good news, we have not needed any algicide treatments since we started. They're still in the toolbox in case we need them, but we're not anticipating that we will, just based on the history here. And then where we are actually changing up the strategy a little bit is at Chartley. We had gotten some good results in past years with the spot treatments. So we're actually recommending doing that again next year for any areas that do regrow. Now, we may find that we're pleasantly surprised next spring when we go out and the sonar treatment from this year was actually more effective than we were anticipating. And that would be great. But just in case we're not, we've got that in our pocket. And of course, we'll continue with the hand pulling there as well to keep water chestnut at bay. So that's really the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, that's a good trend so far compared to what we've seen in prior years. So that's good. And it looks like Dan Pearson, did you have a hand up, or was that something else? You're muted, Dan.
I'm sorry, that was just clapping at the end of the presentation.
I see. All right. All right. Okay. So any other questions among commission members? I think that overall, particularly on Lake Winnicott, which I recall when it was just basically a constant, a continuous dense mat of weeds that prevented people from even taking boats into it. That was several years ago. And I think we've seen substantial improvement from those conditions. So, so things are looking good from my perspective.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
My pleasure.
All right. Unless there are further questions, I think we can move on to our next items. And thank you, Matt.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy the holiday.
Yeah, you too, Matt. Thank you.
Night.
Thanksgiving.
So I believe the last items on our agenda are review of draft minutes for October 18th and November 8th. And I went through these and I didn't find anything that I would alter. They're pretty comprehensive. Anyone have any questions, comments?
Yes, a very minor thing. But if Lisa were here, this would probably still be in her craw. And that is on page, on the October 18th, page 5 of 10. I believe that what she would want is keep the address, the URL for historic aerials, but then take out the explanation thereafter. Whereas now I understand the correction correctly. We're keeping the explanation, but taking out the URL. So we just want to flip those.
Okay, wouldn't I take out all of it, like the URL and the explanation for it?
Well, it's true that Lisa didn't give us the URL, but it would be helpful for people like me who are lay people to know what she's talking about a little bit. I mean, I can understand taking out that, you know, that blurb that they give, but I don't see the harm in keeping in the URL. But then, as I say, it's a minor, and but you know, when this was brought up, I had no idea what historic aerials was when it came up in the meeting. So,
but here's a question: if you Google the term historic aerials, I assume you would be directed to the webpage to open.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's essential in our minutes that we do anything other than just refer to it as a data set,
Sure.
and it's capitalized, so it would be understood to be that. So I I don't think putting the URL in there is essential.
Okay. No URL, Megan, and no definition blurb or whatever you want to call it afterwards.
Okay, not a problem.
You can call it reference.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Any other modifications?
It looks good to me.
So we can consider a motion to accept the minutes for October 18th as modified.
Chairman, I will make that motion to accept the October 18th minute as expertly modified. Megan.
Second.
All right, motion made by Dan Pearson, seconded by Dan Doyle. Roll call vote, starting with Ron and Carrie.
Aye.
Aye.
And Dan Pearson and Jean.
Aye.
Aye.
And Dan Doyle.
Aye.
And I'll throw in an aye. The motion carries. We now move on to Monday, November 8th minutes. And again, here I did not see anything I would change. And unless there are any other comments, I would consider a motion.
I guess I'll move that we accept the minutes of November 8th, 2021 as drafted.
Motion made by Carrie and seconded by?
Second.
Seconded by Ron. And roll call vote, starting with Ron and Carrie.
Aye.
And then we have it looks like we have an aye from Dan Pearson and Jean and Dan Doyle.
Abstain.
Yes. You guys were
Absent.
absent, yes. And I will throw in an aye, so the motion carries. And I don't think we have anything else on our agenda.
I have one thing. Not really. Like, somebody drafted up a Edith Reed sign on Word or PowerPoint. I forget what it was on, but I went through my emails. I can't find it in our email threads. If somebody could resend that, I'm not sure if it was you, Dan, or Lisa, but
I think it was
Lisa.
Yes,
okay,
it was.
I'll email Lisa then and ask her to resend it.
If I find it, I'll forward it to you.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I have it in the. I'll try to remember to do that.
Yeah, and then for the next meeting, I'll have a draft sign to just show you guys or whatever. It shouldn't take that long just to drop it in the sign program and make it up.
Okay.
All right.
So we have a potential grant. I've been talking with the planning director in town. It's an economic development grant. It's the American Rescue Plan funding, or ARPA. And I'm just trying to gauge from the commission potentially any sort of properties that we are in charge of that potentially could be used to this extent for securing this funding. It's for travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation. So it kind of just, if you can think of any properties offhand, feel free to email me that you can think of that may apply. I can send you the link to kind of what qualifies for this grant. But if you can think of any potential properties that we could potentially improve or benefit from, I'm thinking of Edith Reed, but
Edith Reed.
That's one, obviously. So if there's any other potential properties you can think of where we may be able to direct tourism to, outdoor recreation values, trails, travel, things of that nature, feel free. The grant is going to be due February 1st of next year. So I'd like to have kind of a draft kind of by the end of this year, drafted up to presented to the town and then probably issued out. Obviously the commission can weigh in, but that's kind of my goal, is to try to have something in place to see if we can secure some funding. So if anyone can think of any other properties while they're enjoying their Thanksgiving, just let me know.
I can think of a project, if not a property, or continued project, that is. One is, John, just before your time, I believe there was a scout project, well, maybe it was a year ago or more, that put up an osprey nest on the reservoir. And I wonder if we might not have another one of those somewhere on the reservoir or somewhere else. And also, of course, there are the wonderful projects the Girl Scouts have done, putting up the bat condominiums or whatever the bat houses, bat apartments. So
I believe the osprey nest was vacant all year, but maybe there'll be a tenant next year.
I see. Well, maybe bats can live there.
So the 40 bat condominiums, is that what we're talking about? That was a 40B joke, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I don't know if this is something that could go towards, and obviously this project would be way more than the grant would cover, but and I think there is something,
we lost you, Dan.
Yeah, you're
one more thought. We can always, I don't know if this is something that is done with such projects, but we can always use more support for the bee community. So I don't know if bees nests are put up, but or pollinators generally. If we could support them on Norton land, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, what would we need? A wildflower meadow for that? Is that something that we would need to build?
I don't know, but that's wonderful in and of itself, of course.
Right.
Attracting not only bees but also creatures.
Right.
Yeah, there is. First, we have I think the Leo Yell Conservation Area. Is it on Freeman Street?
Yeah.
Where there were trails at one time, and I don't know if establishing trails again would be helpful for that. And we did have a hay meadow, I think near South Worcester Street, or North Worcester it was, that potentially can be, portion of it converted to wildflower mix.
Mm-hmm.
But those may be difficult to maintain because those meadow areas become closed in very quickly with trees over a very few years.
Right. What about cranberry bogs? Do we have any potential cranberry bogs that are owned by the town?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Of course, there are private cranberry bogs over on Bay Road.
There's one right across the street from my house.
All right. Well, that gives me a list of things to look into. But like I said, Edith Reed is the one that came to my mind when I first thought of this for an opportunity. So, like I said, if anyone can think of anything else, feel free to email the office, and I'll take a look at all this stuff.
All right. Very good.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
Thank
All
you.
right. So unless there are further items, we can consider a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Motion made by Carrie, seconded by Dan Pearson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Till next
Happy
time.
holidays.
Yep.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.